Let me know when you want me to go. All right. Are you seeing my screen here?
Yes.
Okay. Good. So yeah, thanks to Josh and Mary and the network for putting this together. I wanted to just kind of start off with a little thought exercise. So imagine a person forced to sleep on a cold concrete slab, exposed to the elements, sleep deprived, denied adequate food and water, humiliated, degraded, threatened, and harassed by law enforcement. You got that picture in your head? I've got a picture in my head too. And when it's these pictures, there's no doubt that it's torture or cruel and inhuman and degrading treatment, right? But now, thanks to our work, when it's this picture, it's now recognized as a human rights violation, not only at the international level, but also at the domestic level. And vitally, thanks to our domestic advocacy, in conjunction with international human rights standard setting, the human rights of homeless persons are being protected and enforced now by our federal agencies, and finally, by our own courts. And this has been our breakthrough. The work that we and others have done in the US and in Geneva using human rights standards has changed federal policy and made an impact on the lives of the most marginalized and vulnerable in our society. And we've drawn out those lessons into this report. And to sum up a decade of work in just a couple minutes is a challenge, but basically the quick summary is that over a decade of work, we built international standards through human rights monitors called special rapporteurs, and then we got the 3 human rights treaty monitoring bodies that oversee US human rights treaty implementation to condemn and call for more action on criminalization of homelessness, including specific recommendations to create funding incentives and increase enforcement action to discourage the practice. Then in 2015, we got the UN Human Rights Council through their last round of the Universal Periodic Review to make a recommendation specifically on this point. And that was all very impressive on its own, but the breakthrough has really been that through this international advocacy, we've been able to create opportunities with the Department of Justice, with the US Interagency Council on Homelessness, with the Department of Housing and Urban Development, to put the recommendations that these international bodies are making into actual practice in the US. And so HUD created a grant funding stream that incentivizes communities to take steps against criminalization. The DOJ filed a brief in one of our cases supporting our position that has now come out to a Ninth Circuit decision that was actually reviewed and let stand by the Supreme Court, and is changing policies up and down the West Coast. And the US Interagency Council on Homelessness put out a ton of guidance and actively talked about criminalization of homelessness as a human rights violation for a long time, and helped to stop evictions of encampments and do other things that are making an actual concrete difference in people's lives. And all of this is covered in this report, Human Rights to Human Reality, which is on our website. So I'm just going to touch on a few highlights from it, but it's all there if you want to go take a look. So to take a long step back in 2006, when I first came to the National Law Center on Homelessness and Poverty, as it was then, now the National Homelessness Law Center, I came in as our human rights staff attorney with the mission to bring international human rights into our advocacy. And in a country which has not ratified the Economic and Social Rights Treaty and whose courts have struck down notions of positive rights, I knew that we couldn't just go straight to a human right to housing. So we looked at where the human rights had seen success in domestic courts. For example, in the Roper v. Simmons decision, Justice Kennedy devoted a full quarter of the decision to international law, even though he found it wasn't binding, but it informed our interpretation of our own Eighth Amendment standard of cruel and unusual punishment. And because the standard was so widely established across different treaties and other international and comparative jurisprudence, he said this should inform how we should see our Constitution. And we looked and we were inspired by cases like the Pottinger decision in Miami and the Jones decision in Los Angeles that showed that talking about criminalization of homelessness through an Eighth Amendment approach was a viable option. But if we were going to make the case that it was a human rights violation, we needed to shore that up. And so we decided to create this new, widespread, consistent norm that criminalization of homelessness is cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment from scratch. Easy, right? But we had a plan. So we started with special rapporteurs, who are these individual experts who we developed a good relationship with and who have a little more freedom in their commentary. Over the course of a few years, we targeted each of these rapporteurs who might comment on the issue of criminalization of homelessness, most obviously the rapporteur on the right to adequate housing, but also rapporteurs on water and sanitation, on extreme poverty, on women's rights, and where we took any opportunity that we could get in order to get something from them, some commentary from them. So where official mission visits were planned, we participated in those. When no official mission was coming, we found their annual thematic reports and worked our issue into their reports. And got them to do press releases and other things to comment on issues in the US. And in each of these, we got them specifically to talk about criminalization as cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment, not just as a kind of blanket human rights violation, until we had built up the beginnings of this record that we needed. And then as we developed these standards, we included this analysis alongside our domestic legal and policy analysis in all of our reports. And then in 2012, the US Interagency Council on Homelessness put out a report of their own talking about criminalization of homelessness, not just as a constitutional issue, but as a human rights treaty violation. The first time any domestically focused agency has talked about any domestic issue as a human rights treaty violation. And how do we know this was because of our reports? Because they cited directly to our report in referencing this provision. And had we not included that language in our own reports in the first place, USICH would never have been able to draw on it to put into their official report. And so that's why one of the most important things that advocates can do is just start using this language in your own advocacy, build it up, and you'll never know where it might end up. And once we got this domestic recognition, we used that to bootstrap ourselves up from there, as I'll talk a little bit more about later. But we got these special rapporteur comments and the USICH commentary just in time for the 2014 reviews of the US under the 3 major human rights treaties to which it's party. And by showing them that we had already established a basis with the rapporteur's commentary, we could just say that the treaty bodies should confirm the norm rather than have to go out on a limb and create a norm. We also had the US itself with a statement that criminalization might violate the treaties that these bodies oversee. And so we could say to the committee members, look, even the US already accepts this. This is not going to be something that's controversial for you to be addressing. And the committees came through not only with the cruel, inhuman, and degrading language we were seeking, but also with specific recommendations to take immediate steps to abolish criminalization, including through funding incentives, which was one of our major domestic goals at the time. And each time we got recognition from an international source, we repeated it back domestically. And each time a domestic source echoed the international, we let the rapporteurs and the treaty bodies know how much impact their comments were having, with each side giving positive reinforcement back to the other, while also further establishing the credibility of the norm we had created and the mechanisms themselves. We also used the opportunity to speak directly to people through YouTube videos directly from Geneva, connecting people from where they were to up to the international level and making them feel like they were part of the action there. And then we used the treaty process, not just the review, but the entire process of government consultations to prompt meetings with government officials, show them what we would be holding them accountable to at the international level, and then push them for action. And through all this education and engagement, we built allies within the government who were comfortable talking about housing and criminalization of homelessness as human rights obligations and violations. And even today, in this new administration, we still have a HUD webpage citing the human rights obligations as part of our obligations around criminalization. And HUD modified its funding application to incentivize communities to stop criminalization, and those funding incentives remain. And the DOJ submitted a brief in one of our cases, thanks to a meeting that we had as part of one of these treaty reviews, where they asked us, what more could they do? And we said, well, we have a case. And they said, great, sign us up. And 6 months later, we got their intervention on our case, which, as I said, has now resulted in a decision from the Ninth Circuit that is making a daily difference in the lives of people across the country. Homeless people are sleeping safer tonight because of this work that we've done in Geneva and then brought back to the US. We changed the baseline of the conversation at the federal level to one where criminalization is now considered a human rights issue. And while just talking about it in those terms is a small thing, it actually kind of changes the baseline of everything and makes so much more possible. And now the right not to be punished for sleeping on the streets isn't our end goal. Our end goal is making sure everybody enjoys their full human right to adequate housing. And I'm not endorsing any specific candidate here because we're a 501c3 organization, and that would be wrong. But this spring, we got Senators Warren, Booker, Harris, Sanders, and Castro, Representative Castro, or former Secretary Castro, all calling housing a human right. And now, for the first time since FDR, we have a presidential candidate calling housing a right. And we have taken what we've gained at the international level and we've pulled it into the mainstream political conversation. And now there are bills being introduced, and it's really setting the stage for a dramatic shift in how our country approaches housing issues, not just as charity, not just as some optional policy consideration, but as a human right to which everybody should be entitled. And so that's the kind of quick overview. And I just close with a little story of when I was in Portland a few years ago. I was meeting with a group of homeless advocates, and after we kind of talked, one of the folks came up to me. He, was somebody who had clearly been on the streets for a long time, and he kind of pulls out of a tattered folder a copy of our litigation, our Martin versus Boise case, and a copy of our report to the UN on criminalization of homelessness. And he said, I just want to let you know that this has made all the difference to me. I got my first decent night's sleep in years because of this case and the work that you're doing. And, it's not everybody who will see that direct connection from our international work to the domestic work and then to their basic life experience. But that to me was exactly the end of the case study that that I had been writing in my head about how to do this for more than a decade. We had gone to the international level, we had advocated on this issue as a human rights issue, and then here I was seeing somebody standing right in front of me whose human rights were being enjoyed rather than violated. And that's exactly what we want to see. So that's the quick story.
Thank you, Eric. That was amazing. You could cover over a decade in 15 minutes. That's most attorneys would be like, that's beyond belief. But maybe we can tease out just some of the parts that were so powerful. What was it? I know what was really amazing was how comprehensive you are and so many different ways that you coordinated from the ground to Geneva. And maybe for Truth to Power Thursday and people learning about the UPR and why they should engage, you said you used both, that if a rapporteur was just writing a thematic report and also if a rapporteur was making a visit. Could you maybe share some of the best lessons from engaging with those special procedures and how, in a way, you said they were some of the best ones to begin to build your foundation?
Yeah. So there's no wrong place to begin. That's what jump right into the UPR process, or see how you can engage with the rapporteurs or whatever. Just start doing it is the first recommendation. But when we, some of the story is that there was actually a round of treaty reviews in kind of 2007, 2006, 5, 6, 7, a little bit. And we had thrown basically the kitchen sink at the national human rights monitors and tried to tell them everything that's going wrong in the US. That didn't work. They didn't, focus in on any of the issues that we really needed them to focus in on. And we decided that for our own process to work, that we actually had to focus ourselves and prioritize ourselves. Otherwise, we would be leaving it up to the treaty bodies to do it for us, and they might not prioritize the way we wanted to. And so that's when we decided to focus in specifically on this issue of criminalization. And but by the time we'd kind of learned that lesson, we were in this big, the treaty bodies review the country more or less every 4 or 5 years, and we were in a gap in between the reviews, and so we looked, where else can we find some way of engaging in that community? And we saw that there were at that point a bunch of UN special rapporteurs, these experts appointed by the Human Rights Council, who were doing country visits to the US. And they also, every year, they write at least one thematic report on something. And so as I said, like, we looked at them and we said, this is a way to build our issue. If we can just get them starting to talk about this issue, then we'll set ourselves up for the next round of the treaty reviews. And so that's what we did. We talked to, we reached out to them. They, every year they'll put out a call for information about whatever their thematic issue is. And so we would participate in those, and we even help to suggest that, they focus in on one issue or another, and help them develop those reports once we built up a relationship with them. And then when we actually did their mission visits to the US, we were able to take advantage of those and shine a real spotlight on these issues in the US. When you have a UN monitor coming to different cities, you can really grab the attention of the local media and say, look, they're looking at stuff right here in whatever city as a human rights violation. And you can get some good mileage out of that. Now, the problem with that is that right now, the U.S., since Trump took office, has not invited any rapporteurs to the U.S. The last visit was in 2017. That was a visit that was scheduled before Trump took office, and it just kind of happened then. But so it's been, we don't have any starting now, but you can also ask the rapporteurs to do informal visits. And so if you can, pay their way, get them invited to a conference or something, then they can come, they can walk around, and you can try and get some media attention. And so we've been able to take advantage of some of those opportunities as well. But as I said before, their job is to be more quickly responding, more issue spotting than the treaty body. And so they have a little bit more freedom. You can work a little bit more with them to get, specifically the standards that you want to see. And then once you have that, then you can move on to kind of the more legalistic treaty bodies and things like that. And then, also the UPR. It's useful to have this record established so you can emphasize to the Human Rights Council members that they aren't going out on a limb, they aren't making some bold new statements, but that they're well within the mainstream of human rights commentary. And so yeah, once we got the first ones, we kind of just kept building it up from there. And my goal as a lawyer was to build this clear and consistent standard in order to be able to actually actively use it in our litigation. And we certainly have tried to do that, but we actually haven't gotten courts to cite to human rights obligations. But what we did do was through the human rights treaty process, the review process, we had conversations with the Department of Justice that led to them intervening in our case, which led to the case being super effective and actually changing the lives of people. And so, I think the other piece of this for people to know is, it might not go exactly the way you planned, but if you just take advantage of all the different opportunities, look at litigation, look at policy advocacy, look at what you can do through funding streams or whatever, just make as much, human rights advocacy is as much as you can make of it, I guess is the lesson learned there.
Perfect. Mary?
Thanks for sharing that, Eric, because one thing that I've always felt is that, and it being, as you know, I am from a pretty grassroots type of organization, that one of the things that once people understand this process can make them feel empowered to use their voices is exactly the kind of thing you're talking about. And I was particularly moved by the story about the Portland man. And so I guess because in so many organizations like that, as you well know, we talk about the UN or this or that, and it's kind of this like pie in the sky, what does that have to do with me thing. So I'm just wondering if you could comment on whether you've encountered that kind of attitude, and you've obviously prevailed over that kind of attitude to get people interested. So just if you have any hints for the rest of us, that would be great.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Certainly, particularly from legal audiences, but from lots of different people, we definitely got that approach. And for a long time, I admit that it felt like I was banging my head against a brick wall. I could not see the immediate impact of our work, and it doesn't work on a 2-year grant cycle. Just long-term movement building work, because we're trying to shift consciousness, and that doesn't happen overnight. But I can draw you a straight line from all of this advocacy to Joe Biden having housing as a right in his platform, and then this past year we also had, for example, the Moms for Housing out in Oakland took over a house, and said, this is vacant property. These are, women and families who need housing. Housing is a human right. We're going to enforce it directly. And they got a ton of attention. They talked about housing as a human right. Eventually, just actually last week, they signed the deed to the house, and now they own it. And in the meantime, we worked with them to develop a California statewide amendment which would make housing a human right. And so we are getting this language into actual legislation. And now at the federal level, we work with Representative Jayapal's office to make a Housing is a Human Right Act of 2020. And so this is, we aren't there yet. The amendment didn't pass. The federal act didn't pass yet, but we're changing the conversation. And it has taken the better part of 2 decades almost now, but like I said, I can draw a straight line from those meetings that we had back in 2005, 2006, all the way through to the victories that we're having now. So like I said, you don't necessarily know which of the avenues are going to pan out,
Erickson.
but it's definitely it is possible. And there's a story, one of these Malcolm Gladwell stories about called David versus Goliath, and Gladwell tells the story of this Indian immigrant who is coaching his daughter's high school basketball team, and he, the girls are awful. They never win, and he grew up in India where soccer is like the name of the game, and where anywhere on the field, if you turn over the ball, you can test it there. But in basketball, you just sit out like the normal way they play is you turn over the ball and everybody retreats and gives up 3/4 of the court. And so he decided he could get his girls, build their endurance far faster than he could get their skills. And so just have them go to a full court press all the time and just trained for their endurance. And they started winning. The other teams didn't know what to do because these girls weren't giving up 3/4 of the court. And so when I see, advocates in the U.S. who are talking about housing issues, but just kind of making do with the charitable systems, with the systems that, right now only 1 in 4 people who are income eligible for HUD assistance actually gets it. That means 3 in 4 aren't. And we're arguing every year just to like maintain the HUD budget rather than push it back up to the level it really needs to get. Like, we're giving up 3/4 of the court there. We need to go to the full court press for the human right to housing all the time. And that's how we're going to shift out of the game that everybody else is playing and into like the game where we're actually in control. And so, yes, it may start off as kind of pie in the sky, but if we make a commitment to it, then we actually change the way the game is played.
Thanks. That was a great story, Eric. Thank you so much.
Eric, I was wondering if you could walk us through 2 sides. One is, with the treaty bodies, what you're able to accomplish with each of those rounds, and then how you built on that language. And then the other aspect we'll get to, I think, which is also so valuable, is the way you use social media. And we're kind of leading up to the 3-week countdown to the United States UPR, and it's how civil society can use the social media and engage from the ground in Geneva at the same time.
Sure. So with the treaty bodies, so in that 2012 report that we were able to get from the U.S. Married Council on Homelessness, they said criminalization may not only violate our constitutional obligations, but may violate our obligations under the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and Convention Against Torture. And so we had very clear goals that we wanted, the U.S. government said it may violate those rights. We wanted those committees to confirm that it in fact does in those reviews. And so we, really focused in these reviews kind of happened in order. The first one was the Convention Against Torture review, and we weren't quite prepared for that. We did. That committee has an advance process for getting their list of issues, the issues that they're going to discuss at their hearing, and we missed the boat on it, and so didn't get officially on the list, but we did get them to talk about it at the hearing, but we didn't get a recommendation, which was a little bit. But then next up was the review by the Human Rights Committee of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. And that one we were fully prepared for. we actually met one of the members of the committee, chair of the committee actually, was, in the U.S. For another conference, and I just walked up to him after the presentation and said, "Listen, we are using, this, for many of these human rights, bodies, they make their commentary and it goes into a vacuum, and it's just words on a shelf somewhere, and they don't actually get put into action." So I emphasize to him, if you are able to make this recommendation, we are going to be able to do it. Look what we've done already with just the rapporteur recommendations. We can actually turn this into something. I think that caught his attention, and said, this is something that we can do for the field, but it's also going to look good for us as a committee, because we had already demonstrated that we were using these human rights standards, and what better for them to be able to say we're part of actually creating change in the U.S., in the most powerful country in the world. And then when we were in Geneva, I'm telling this story kind of from the perspective of the Law Center and like the technical way we were approaching it. But throughout this whole process, we were making sure that this was a very grassroots, bottom-up process as well. And so we brought people who had experienced homelessness, who had experienced criminalization with us, and had them testify before the committee much more than it was me. And that really, we had the technical language and words that we submitted through the written process, and I made some statements here or there, but it was really putting forward the voice of the direct impact of people that then connected to their hearts, and as I was trying to connect to their minds. And the one member of the committee, Sir Nigel Robley, who was actually, before he was on the Human Rights Committee, he was the special rapporteur on torture. And so he's seen the worst of the worst all around the world. And he just said, there in the hearing with the U.S., myself and my colleagues, I don't think we can even begin to comprehend how you can't give somebody who needs a home and then arrest them for not having a home.
Yeah.
That was the level of understanding and the absurdity of the whole thing, but like how much it personally impacted him, that we were able to get him to make a statement like that. And then their recommendation, as I said kind of earlier in the presentation, we got very specific language. We got the language that we needed to force, to push HUD to actually create those funding incentives. It wasn't just, stop criminalizing. It was create funding incentives, or, take additional enforcement actions. The exact thing. And then we took those back to DOJ, to HUD, and we said, when they say create funding incentives, here's the funding, here's our grant line that we want you to change, and then we were able to get them to do it. And then we moved to the next round, which was the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. And here we talked about the disparate racial impact of homelessness and disparate ways that criminalization of homelessness impacts communities of color. And we got to make almost identical recommendations to the Human Rights Committee, in which reinforced our message. But we also used language, they said, to abolish criminalization of homelessness. And for me, knowing the history of the committee and the work that they do, abolish is not a word that they use lightly. It's an abolitionist statement. They have trying to, this is something that is so wrong it should be abolished from the face of the earth the same way we talk about slavery should be abolished. And so, you know, that getting that language from them in knowing who it was coming from was really powerful for us. But like I said, we got almost identical language from both of those committees to really firmly establish with all these agencies and, you know, with the court, our court kind of approach, that this is problematic under all of these treaties. And then we moved forward into the UPR and got a recommendation there that kind of confirmed the norm. So the recommendation we got from the UPR in 2015 was to end the criminalization of homelessness in line with human rights standards. And so when they phrased it that way, to me, that says, you know, before we were building this norm, but now was in line with human rights standards. So they're saying this is already established. You have established the norm. And for me, that's powerful in bringing it to a court and being able to say, like, I'm not, you know, even though I have a citation this long on the page, it's not just me saying it. Like, even at the international level, they're saying this is a norm. And so that was kind of the what we iterated through the process. And in terms of the social media, I mean, we were making it up as we went along, but I thought it was really important for our grassroots advocates who couldn't make it to Geneva to be connected to the work in Geneva, and know that the statements and the effort that they put into helping us draft the reports was actually having and trying to grow the movement kind of that way. Now, you know, that was just when we had YouTube. Now there, you know, all these different platforms, Instagram and TikTok, and even just Twitter. I don't think it existed back. Maybe it existed, but I wasn't using it. You know, so there's so many more ways that people are being. They're so much more connected over distance. And so, you know, even if you can't make it to Geneva, you can still, you know, follow along on there. You can watch the live stream hearings. You can live tweet about it. You can, you know, make a little video that accompanies a formal report, and, you know, send that and try and get in front of the eyes of various rapporteurs or the street bodies or whoever you're advocating with. So I think there's a lot more ability using social media to make the story relevant for the international advocacy itself, but then to really bring it into the U.S. and to share the message out through the networks. And, you know, like I said, the work in the international level, the work in Geneva is just a tool, means to an end. And if you, the only way it becomes meaningful is if you make it meaningful. Treaty bodies, the rapporteurs, they make recommendations. They do not make binding law in the U.S. And if you just let it end when the treaty review ends or when the mission ends, it's, you know, it's not going anywhere on its own. So as our friend Sarah Poletti famously always said, you know, when you get to the end of whatever process you're at, now the real work begins. It's like, you gotta keep it going. You gotta make that work that you've already done actually mean something. And, you know, so yeah, the government's not going to do anything on its own. The courts aren't going to do anything on its own. You know, your fellow advocates aren't going to learn about this on their own. The only way it's going to happen is if, you know, each individual group takes the time, takes the effort to take what they've already gained and infuse it back into their advocacy, however they're doing it. And, you know, and we make human rights real in this country as much as anybody else.
Eric, that's truer words can never been spoken. And of course, as we're coming up to the countdown, most people do want to think after the grilling of the government on November 9th is over. But that might be a whole other Zoom meeting or a webinar from consideration to adoption, what we can do until the next Human Rights Council session. One thing I thought maybe you could conclude with those, how you built those personal relationships, like when you know you had your issue on housing as a human right, where did you think about with the UPR in Geneva to which countries to reach out to, how you researched that, and then the process you went about doing that. And maybe you could just share, and a lot of it is your personal relationships, your connection with the HUD members, drinking with them, meeting them in Geneva, then bringing it back to the ground, and then meeting at the Capitol again. So kind of how you weave that throughout the entire process.
Yeah, I mean, and obviously it's a position of real privilege to be able to go to Geneva. Geneva is not a cheap city, and we were able to raise and grant resources to be able to do that. Back in 2015, we weren't able to raise it this time around, and in the past, the U.S. Human Rights Network has provided a lot of scholarships. You know, the foundations just haven't been as forthcoming. And then now you've got the whole COVID situation. Nobody's traveling anywhere. So some of that is challenging, but you know, the way we approached it for the UPR is there's a great website, upr-info.org, and you can find out all of the different commentary. You can search keywords and say who's commented on this. And so we looked for anybody, any country who had made comments on housing or homelessness or criminal justice issues, racial discrimination, and we kind of sorted them all out. We used some resources from a pro bono law firm one year. We used resources from a human rights legal clinic another year. So you can, even if you can't do that resource in-house or develop those resources in-house, you can look for other groups to help you. There are tons of human rights clinics all across the country who are always looking for projects. So, you know, reach out to them, and they can help you kind of do this research. And so once you have that list of countries who have commented on similar issues, then you, you know, you go online and you go to the website for the mission of the, you know, the country of Germany or Norway or whoever it is, and you, you know, click on the contact us link and you say, I'm Eric Tard. I've got a, you know, we're coming up to the USPR. I know you're going to be making some comments. I know in the past we talked about housing and homelessness issues. Here's a one-pager that we've developed to talk, you know, that says the issues we want to raise. Can we get a meeting? And in the case of, you know, the previous reviews, it was really good timing that we had the reviews of the U.S. under the treaty bodies before UPR, because when I was there in November of 2014 for the review by the Committee Against Torture, set us up for, it was, you know, kind of the right 6 months before the April 2015 review of the U.S. And so we were just kind of there in the right window. And so I was there for the Against Torture hearings, but I set up all these side meetings with other countries, and, you know, met them at the embassies, met them in the servants around at the UN, and just talked to them. And then also the U.S. Human Rights Network set up broader briefings for embassy staff in D.C. That we participated in. And the recommendation that we got on criminalization was from Egypt, and Egypt was not a country that we had targeted. But when this group briefing for a bunch of different countries on a bunch of different issues happened in DC, showed up to UDC early, walked into the room, and the representative from Egypt was there early as well. So I walked up and started talking to him, talked about the issue, gave him our one pager, and said, if Egypt is looking for an easy issue to talk about, one where the U.S. has already said we accept this as a human rights issue, and one where we're actually going to be able to do something with the recommendation, here's your issue. And I at the time I could not tell if I made an impact on him, but then several months later there was the recommendation. So you kind of just manage those opportunities and put yourself out there. If you're antisocial, force yourself to be more social, and have those conversations. And same thing with the Department of Justice and HUD, who we were in these big group briefings with for these consultations, and it was really a matter of after you wrap up, you seek out your target person. I want to be able to talk to that person from the DOJ, and you make your way over to them and try to push the conversation a little bit, and at a minimum see if you can get another meeting with them one-on-one. But if you get something substantive, that's how we got we had made this broad request at briefing after briefing after briefing. We want the DOJ to intervene in one of our cases. We want the DOJ to intervene in one of our cases. And then finally, at this one consultation, I walked up to Jonathan Smith, the civil rights director for the DOJ, and he said, "We have a case that we could actually do this in." And I said, "Well, yes, we do." And 6 months later, they submitted their brief for us, and it got national attention. And again, this is kind of another way that the process, you never know what you're going to get. Kind of if we had just gotten a single court in Idaho to cite some human rights law in one of its decisions, that would have been great, but it would not have made this splash. But we got the DOJ to say criminalization of homelessness is unconstitutional, and that was front page news in newspapers. The Washington Post did an editorial on it. And a lot of people were talking about the DOJ ruling on criminalization, and of course, the DOJ doesn't make rulings; it's not a court, but we didn't stop them from saying that, and it changed behavior immediately. This guy in Portland came up to me. That was the state of the case that the case had not been decided on the circuit at that point. It was just the DOJ statement that caused Portland to immediately stop evicting encampments and say, people are free to sleep, and we're not. So that's it's just forcing yourself out of your comfort zone and talking to people, making it up as you go.
I think that definitely comes through when you talk about the process is also your passion, your patience, but also persistence. And you have to have all three to make it through. But then you just have to keep moving at it. And I think that's why most people are pursuing this CPR. That's why we're looking at what we can do in this process and what we can achieve, and then how we can move forward. So thank you so much for walking us through all those different aspects. And we encourage everyone who see this to, in the next 3 weeks, reach out to those UN missions. We'll be doing virtual serpentine sessions, having people meet if we can't meet there. And then, of course, it is crazy times in the election year, but people might be interested during that week. We know the election will be quite contentious so far based on one side statements that will probably have side events as well that after the election leading up to November 9th. But thank you very much, Eric, for talking about housing as a human right. Mary, do you have any concluding question?
No, I don't. I want to thank Eric and his whole team for all the wonderful work they've done. You've been an inspiration to all of us, and the UPR Task Force and the Human Rights Network really appreciates this wonderful presentation, and we're going to try and make sure that everybody sees it, because everybody needs to know that housing is a human right.
Great, and yeah, happy to do it. Thank you so much for having me, and yeah, we'll keep on working on it. And thank you, both Mary and Josh and the whole task force. Haven't been able to be as involved this time around as I was in previous years, but it's so great to see the work continuing, and know how hard it is and how much it takes. So I'm really happy to see the work continuing, and we'll keep on doing whatever I can to help.
We appreciate that, Eric.
Thanks, Eric.
You were the first one that helped us do those UPR sessions where we would actually have one of us in Geneva, and then we'd have the Human Rights Council where you and Mary and other economic, social, and cultural rights, housing, healthcare, education would join, and we would be so excited. So we were doing this advocacy before the COVID. We actually invented this system of education commissions way ahead of this current crisis.
Thanks, everybody, so much.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, bye.